Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Hannah Broddard, and today we are joined by Sara McNamara. Welcome to the podcast, Sara.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, so I just want to remind our listeners that we are in the middle of a series of episodes where we talk about survival strategies, different ways to manage and handle stressful situations in our lives. And as leaders, there are plenty of those. So having some helpful strategies to manage through life's stressful situations that get thrown on us is really important, right? So that's really what this mini series is in the larger context of intentional leadership, which is really what we're talking about this entire season. So I do want to remind everyone that we have a guide that you can follow along this conversation and this topic that we're exploring in the series. So go to magicintheroom.com and you can download that free guide that has some really helpful reflections for you to do as we're working through this topic. All right. So with that introduction, Sara, welcome. Luke, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, super excited to have you here, Sara. And I know for folks listening, when we think about stress and what causes stress in our lives, oftentimes it's sparked by change, something being different, either an expectation that we had that isn't met, or something in our environment changing that we have to respond to, or even internal changes, maybe changes in our own values or beliefs that can cause all sorts of after effects in our life. And Sara, you're an expert in change, and Sara's professional career has been built around helping people navigate change. So Sara, I would love for you to introduce yourself, catch us up. What type of change and transition is kind of your bread and butter? And how should we think about how we as leaders respond to change?
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Luke and Hannah. Again, I'm really happy to be here and have this conversation. And my story is so unique that sometimes I have a hard time believing it. And so I'll dive in. My work today is centered around the military-connected community. And it's a really small percentage of the population. And so how did I get here? There was no career track for this. So I have to start at the beginning. I worked 20 years or so in corporate America. I was in marketing and business development and leadership development for major telecom companies, and married to a Marine, and thought I had a really great, purposeful life. And then I had an opportunity to pivot pretty dramatically and go work aboard the Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton for a DoD level transition assistance program called SkillBridge. And going in, I thought I knew everything about transition. My husband had transitioned out, went to work for a big corporate employer pretty seamlessly. And so I was like, big deal. Well, it's a big deal. And I realized that because I worked firsthand with a small cohorts of transitioning service members who admitted they were very stressed and very anxious. And I had one who said, Sara, well, they don't call me Sara, ma'am, which I never got used to. Ma'am, I'm more afraid of transition than I was when I was 18 on the big yellow bus leaving for boot camp. And that was the moment. It was January 17th, 2017, when I knew I had my work cut out for me. I just knew it because I had a 30-year Marine tell me he was afraid of going to work as a veteran, as a civilian in the civilian workforce. And I couldn't imagine it because I knew through my husband and through the movies and hearsay and what we all know about military work experience And it is something that very few people can do successfully. And I mean, just getting through boot camp is, forget it, I would fail on day one. So these people have done amazing things, very difficult things in their career. And I couldn't imagine they were afraid of transition. So I knew I was going to leverage my corporate experience, what I knew about the personal side of being a military spouse, and my experience firsthand with these people taking off the uniform, checking in their gear, doing their VA appointments, and really changing their identity and transforming as humans to be able to go out and be successful in their second careers. So that was 6 or so years ago. Since then, I've spent every moment really learning about the human experience of transition, the military culture, the organization culture, like how we operate as civilian organizations, what the mindsets are of leaders who hire and retain their military veterans, and really the value of this veteran talent and very diverse talent. And so that is the focus of my work today.
Yeah. So just to dive in maybe one layer deeper, what is it? So you mentioned organizational culture. You mentioned change in setting. You mentioned change in pace. What is it that makes transitioning from the military hard for the folks that you're working with? And are there any takeaways for leaders who are thinking about hiring folks transitioning out of the military that you said, hey, the key to making this work is what?
There's two sides to that. Number one, from a leadership perspective, the leader has to be willing to ask questions and take risks, and they might sound stupid. It's possible, because many people don't understand the military talent, and so their foundation is based on assumptions, but they don't ask questions because they're afraid or something is holding them back. So number one, from a leadership perspective, just say, hey, thank you for your service. Why did you join the service? What drove you? What did you love the most about it? What are you the most proud of? What are you excited to apply as a civilian or as a veteran in the civilian workforce? So get a little deeper, and create an environment where the veteran can exhale and really feel confident and secure and safe in order to showcase that his or her talent and talk about stories in meaningful ways. Because when you come out of the military culture, it's very much a structured and scripted and disciplined culture. A lot of times, service members don't feel like they have permission or the freedom to say really what they feel and share their true stories. And so leaders on the other side really need to be aware of that and create environments where real conversations can happen. Like, tell me a joke. When I was interviewing Marines at Camp Pendleton, I saw it. I was frustrated. Like don't sound like the person just before you. Smile. What makes you happy? What did you do in high school? What is your dog's name? Like, be human. And everything changed after that for me and for them.
I'd love to hear maybe a story of a company that you saw get this right. And what is it that they did or programs that they put in place to make it work for people to transition into civilian work life?
All companies can learn from what Wells Fargo is doing. Wells Fargo is taking advantage of all of the federal programs, the DoD Skill Bridge, the internship or the apprenticeship program. They have a dedicated team that is hired to only source military talent. They've expanded to source military spouses. Their workforce, they've invested in workforce development on helping non-veteran, non-military connected people understand, to build team and in collaboration. They're very active in their community. The internal veterans at Wells Fargo, they are a unit and they work together to grow the population. So they're leveraging the camaraderie, the referral network, which is key if anybody wants to source veterans, you don't have to go outside. All you have to do is look inside and say to your current veterans, hey, who are your buddies? Because bring that, we want to hire them. And really, leaders don't need to do that. If the veteran is happily employed, the veteran applicants will come. It's free and easy. If you have an organization that really embraces military talent and makes them feel like any employee, really, it's really no different for veterans, but we're talking about veterans today. Have an environment where they can show up authentically and contribute. Contribution's key. Leaders need to recognize that military veterans need easy wins, quick wins, get them in there, give them something that they can succeed at quickly to build confidence and competence and credibility, and then give them the long goals, something to fight for and achieve that aligns with the organization's mission.
I love hearing that, Sara. And what we're starting to scratch at the surface of here is our main topic today, which is belonging, which is one of those survival strategies that we have. So we know that the antidote to some of the stressful situations that we experience in life, many of them actually, is human connection and belonging, right? So when we have a thriving community around us, we're better able to manage and cope with stressful situations. And it's often what gets us through those hard times in a more helpful, supported way. And so I would love to just let's explore that a little bit. Like, what is belonging? And when we talk about belonging, what do we really mean? And Sara, if you want to share kind of within the context that you set up of someone transitioning from the military, which I think we can also draw parallels to that, to other big life transitions that we may have experienced, even if we don't have that particular experience of transitioning from the military. So talk to us a little bit about, what do you see? How would you define belonging? And let's dig into that topic a little bit.
Thanks. Yeah, we can learn a lot. And I have certainly learned a lot just by being exposed to the military community. And the first lesson really is at boot camp. And I thought a lot about what makes boot camp so successful and what makes the military successful. And it is about being able to do things, the hard things, and what makes that possible. And it's camaraderie, it's trust, it's leadership, effective leadership, it's a commitment to the mission, and it's personal drivers. Like, why am I here? And every veteran I talk to, like, why are you there? What made you go? And the stories are vast, but everybody has an internal driver. And that's really the model. So if we transfer that into an organization, and we're asking teams to do hard things, well, is there trust? Do they have a team? Is there a vision, a mission? Are there set values? Is there a common commitment? And if not, those are the gaps to fill.
Yeah, I love that takeaway. And as I think about shared purpose, that a group or a team can really anchor to, I think any new recruit probably has a really aligned intuition about, why are we doing this? Why does this organization exist? It exists to protect the United States of America. Well, and whatever words are used, it might be different, but it exists to protect families. It exists to protect a way of life. And I think coming in with that as a baseline probably provides a lot of momentum when building trust and a team and being able to do hard things like you're saying. And, that's a good takeaway for, I think, organizational leaders is, do we have a shared purpose that's just as intuitive? That's something that people understand what they're getting into whenever they fill out that application.
Yeah. And I think any leader should be very aware of that. Why am I here? Why is my organization here? And so that they can act accordingly. And so the organization's purpose and values are not just something that are talked about or put on a poster on the wall. It's actually something that people can observe, because purpose-driven people like veterans are going to be watching. And when organizations fail, or their values are misaligned, or they're saying one thing, doing another, that makes it difficult for a veteran.
Yeah. So when we say belonging, we're really talking about this core human need for interpersonal relationships, right? For affiliating, for connectedness, for being part of a group. We all have that need as one of the most deeply rooted needs as a human, right? Arguably even more important than our physiological needs, or maybe they're equally important. I don't know. Much debate has been made of, Maslow's hierarchy, and is it really a hierarchy? I think the important thing to recognize is that in the Maslow model, we have all these different needs that are outlined, right? And one of the core ones is that need for belonging, right? So some of the examples are friendship, intimacy, trust, acceptance, receiving and giving affection, and of love, right? And we see when we have those needs met as humans, we just function better, we operate better, right? And I think that's an important thing for organizations to recognize, is that need for every human to feel like they belong to something. And you talked about purpose and values, right? Those are tools that can help create a sense of belonging when they're very clearly defined and articulated and communicated, and we invite people in to be part of that mission and feel like, individuals are part of something greater than just the tasks of the job that they're doing.
I think that's an excellent point. Unified values help people feel like they belong. Yes, 100%. And psychological safety too. I mean, there's a lot of talk about psychological safety, and I love it because it's true. If people feel like they can contribute and learn and challenge authority, and if they feel like they're included, let's start with that, then they will show up authentically, and then as a result feel like they belong. It seems so simple, but it's so hard. Because everybody has to do it. If you have a leader who is not showing up authentically, it's going to be difficult for other people to do that.
Yeah.
I love the conversation around belonging and stress going together. I know there's been a lot of work around trauma and how to mitigate trauma, essentially, how to keep stress from turning into lasting traumatic effect on people. And a lot of it has to do with, is there a support system in place? So I think for leaders thinking about creating communities of belonging as a antidote, maybe, for stress becoming something that's manageable, or for keeping stress within the manageable box and out of the traumatic box, I think that's really helpful. So I'm curious, Sara, how you've seen communities of belonging as that sort of critical add-on to help stressful transitions be manageable versus really get out of hand or not be sustainable.
In the military, it's called the battle buddy, and everybody has one, and organizations can learn from that as well. And there's one company I work with who's created a program for the veterans in the workforce to support their recruiting team to interview and select veteran applicants. And when, for example, an Army applicant comes in, the recruiter knows that they have a list of Army veterans, and they source their current employees to come in and partner with recruiters to do the sourcing and interviewing and selection and hiring and onboarding. So this applicant, is having a warm welcome before they even get their job offer. and it continues throughout like a 90-day period. So this pre-hire mentor coach buddy model is a winner because it sets the person up for a very low stress or lower level stress experience as a new hire. I mean, being new is not fun for anybody. And coming from an outside culture like the military, you must be coming in from the moon. And you don't even know what your first name is. I mean, really, you don't know the language. You don't know who you are. All you know is you need a paycheck and you've got dependents and a mortgage. And so if you have a buddy who's been through it, who can help you understand, okay, this is what we do. These are the things that nobody will tell you, but I'm going to tell you. This is who to talk to. This is where you go for lunch. All those norms. If there's somebody to help me go through that, the chances of lower stress, higher retention, greater contribution, massive military talent utilization. These are all made possible by that.
Yeah. Wow. That's a really good model, I think, to, use this example of the battle buddy and introduce that in our onboarding programs, right? As companies, whether it's with military specific, but I think it applies in general too for any new hire to have having a buddy that's assigned to be kind of their guide through the organization.
Something that they have in common. I want to point out something that they have in common: military experience, where they went to school, some relatability bond. Make a great battle buddy.
I love that.
I'm also thinking about applying it to really stressful situations. I think about organizations we were working with in spring and summer of 2020 as the pandemic was causing everyone to respond. I mean, through reductions in force and all sorts of financial pressures, and just this idea of, having a battle buddy through really challenging times as an organization. What could that have protected against from a belonging and community protection standpoint?
I'm telling you, I had the chills, seriously. I mean, we missed the opportunity, and we have an opportunity to move forward and really put that into action as leaders, for sure. Yeah. I mean, and it's easier from a psychological safety standpoint to have a conversation with one person, much easier than a group or my leader. And so if you and I are vulnerable and can be like, oh my gosh, my child is right here sick, I have work demands, I have no food, like my mom is sick, like all these things are swirling. But if I have somebody to talk to, I'm going to feel better about things.
Yeah.
And then it will grow and impact my life as my whole life and yours too. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. All right. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. So there's no coincidence that the three of us are having this conversation about belonging, because a couple of years ago, we got kind of put together by our mutual friend, Sara Elkins, who's been on this podcast multiple times at the NLB conference. And we were asked to co-create a presentation about belonging. And really a lot of this has turned into kind of a body of work that we now teach in different contexts, right? And we've had this ongoing conversation about belonging. But what was so cool about the way the three of us were able to collaborate, we came up with this model of belonging, and we call it the layers of belonging, that I think is kind of a helpful guide to think about belonging in different dimensions. And so, Luke, I'd love it if you could kind of briefly walk us through the model and the different layers, and then we can dive in with some conversation about those.
Sure. So the idea here is that if we're building belonging, it doesn't just happen at a group setting, and belonging is more than that. While we think about belonging being connected to community or a group, it's helpful to identify the other layers that are a piece of it as well. So the first is belonging to ourselves. and really just acknowledging the fact that if we know ourselves, if we accept ourselves, if we're actively managing ourselves, our own needs, desires, goals, and belonging with ourselves, it actually enables us to belong to community more effectively and more quickly, or to identify what communities do I want to belong to and which ones maybe do I want to intentionally experience unbelonging in. So there's this layer of belonging to ourselves, being at home with ourselves, experiencing solitude at times, not always experiencing loneliness if we're by ourselves, but really having community with ourselves. And then the other layer that we don't often think about is belonging to a time and place. Some people would say that this is mindfulness, but I think it really is understanding enough about our own values, about what we're experiencing, that we can say in this time and space, so right now recording this podcast, or, hey, I am walking through the aisle at the grocery store getting groceries. Do we understand what our purpose is in that time and space enough that we can belong there? And oftentimes that's with ourselves. Can I belong with myself in this time and space? Or am I experiencing a time and space with other people, with a community? And can I belong with that group in that time and space? So for me, coming out of a residential experiential camp background, very familiar with this idea of creating spaces and times of belonging that really are temporal. They have a start time and an end time, and that community might not exist after that time. I think organizations do the same thing, whether it's a project team, or I think about this military experience that you're sharing, Sarah, around boot camp, a time and space where belonging occurs, that community looks different after that time and space is over. So those are the three layers: belonging to a community, belonging to ourselves, and belonging to a certain time and space. And I think they all interact with one another. I think really belonging in one of those can help us learn to belong in the other two. And I don't know that they're necessarily it always has to go 1, 2, 3. You can go 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, like all these different orders as we build belonging into our lives.
You asked me earlier what makes leaving military service hard. And there are many things that make it hard. I would guess top, maybe even top number one, top two, is this detachment without an attachment. So leaving the military feeling like they belong, I know I fit in, I'm good, my people, everything is wonderful, and has been for maybe 2 or 3 decades, to I'm not fitting in. I don't know if I belong anywhere. I don't have a sense of belonging. I belong to myself as a Marine, but now I'm not wearing the uniform anymore. So there's a lot of identity around belonging to self that makes transition hard. But this lack of attachment to another community, I would guess, is what makes transition the hardest.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I think about students leaving home, going to a university and joining a fraternity or sorority.
Yeah.
Right. Or someone coming into an organization and trying to find an employee affinity group.
Right.
This idea that I need a new attachment when I let go of old attachments. It's
scary. It's isolating. It's stress inducing. And I know this, back to me quickly, is that I moved around a lot in my life. I went to 2 or 3 different schools. My dad was not in the military, but nonetheless, I was always moving, and I was always the new girl. Always the new girl. Did not love being the new girl. I learned quickly how to make friends and get into communities where I felt like I belonged, because it is a survival requirement. So it's personal for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that too, Sarah. So yeah, I just love this topic, and I know we could go on and keep talking about belonging and psychological safety for probably hours. It's a really core topic to human survival and to be able to thrive as a human. But I'd love to get kind of practical, Sarah, and we've already mentioned some ideas and tools, but what are some practical things that leaders can do to create workplaces that allow for belonging, but also specifically create a sense of belonging for individuals and teams?
Yeah, thanks. I think the first thing that leaders can do is to be vulnerable and show up authentically and show a weakness or ask for help or demonstrate their humanity. Because as a leader, people will follow that. And when people follow that, then you have an environment where many people can show up, contribute, feel safe, belong, and thrive. So leaders, number one, need to let down their guard a little bit and bring people in by being human. The second thing I think would be very effective is to create a unified group by having an external purpose. So when I worked at Verizon, we had a small group of volunteers who donated to the blood bank. And we did the 5K run for the blood bank in Seattle as a team. Shirts, fundraising, let's go. And that created a diverse group of people at work that shared a common, experience and commitment. And that worked. That didn't cost Verizon a dime. So share somewhere to contribute to the community or to the workforce is another idea. And then mentor programs. We talked about battle buddies, but really invest money and resources for people to build relationships together. And don't expect somebody who's got a full-time job to volunteer another 20 hours a week to do this. So leaders need to invest money and hours and people to build this environment. And I guarantee that will support engagement, retention, referrals. Everything good comes out of efforts that where employers or leaders are investing in building relationships within the workforce.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those tips. Luke, what are your thoughts? Any kind of, as we start to wrap up this conversation, what are some things that kind of have stood out to you and that you want to make sure our listeners, key messages for our listeners?
Yeah. So for me, the idea of belonging to ourselves, Sarah identified it as a potential gap for folks who are coming out of very structured, very hierarchical workplaces or communities, whether that's the military or somewhere else. And, we see that. We see it, folks who have gone into a job that's very structured right out of high school and they've done it for 10 or 20 years, and then they make a transition, oftentimes not knowing what they want as an individual is an issue. And so doing that work to really become comfortable with our own sense of self and to be able to steward our own development and our own journey, I think is a place that everyone can start. I think for leaders who are listening, if we aren't doing that and we're not able to verbalize, here's what I need in this job, here's what I need in this community, in this team setting that I'm in. If we don't model being able to say that, it's really hard to help other people develop to be able to say that. And I'll kind of end with a personal anecdote. I was part of a wilderness learning experience in college where I had a 24-hour solo experience where, had a tarp and food that I needed, and I was just out there and couldn't see anyone else and couldn't hear anyone else, just in the wilderness. And it took a long time. It took 12, 18 hours for my mind just to quiet enough from being distracted about what was external to be able to really listen to what was happening with me internally and have the internal dialogue that I needed to have. And that's a small condensed, experience, but I think all of us should be looking for opportunities to have those internal experiences and be comfortable with solitude if we are to expect people to follow us as leaders, and if we're to expect ourselves to have ideas or questions or contributions worth sharing.
Yeah, man, my mind goes to, wow, that was then. And imagine now with all the technology tools we have for constant connection and constant information flow. I wonder, and, that's for another episode, but, what would is that timeline prolonged now because we're so used to being constantly connected, right? Before we really get to have quiet solitude where we can hear our own thoughts and, hear our own wisdom. So just kind of a thought experiment as we kind of wrap up today. Sara, it's been so wonderful to have you, to see you again. I know you've been going through changes and transitions as we have in the last couple years since we had, a deep conversation about belonging for the first time. So it was really great to reconnect and revive this conversation with you. And with that, I think we are ready to close this out. Luke.
Yeah. So Sara, how can people find you? If folks want to follow your work, want to get connected with you, get some of your expertise, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, great. Yes. LinkedIn is great. I'm Sara B. MSOD on LinkedIn. And then my website is transitionstrategiesconsulting.com. Those are the two best ways. Love to have more engagement and grow the community. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I love the work you're both doing. Having purpose in your company name really aligns with the work that I do, and I really am grateful for this opportunity.
Well, we're really grateful for the time today and conversation. And Sara, when I think back about the collaboration that we had a couple years ago around belonging, it has helped me belong better with myself and with teams that I'm a part of. So really grateful for us getting to share a little bit of our stories and journeys as leaders together. For folks listening, if you'd like to connect with Hannah or I or the team, you can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. We're also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, who's not with us today, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. It's produced by Ben West. Social media management by Emma Holland and Maggie King. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded remotely from 3 different time zones. And Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and you can find previous episodes or download the guide for this episode at magicintheroom.com.